Welcome to all our new listeners on Audioversity 106.2 FM, the voice of Reichman University. I'm Gal Rappaport, a researcher at the International Institute for Counterterrorism, and I'm honored to welcome Colonel in Reserves Miri Eisen, the Managing Director of the International Institute for Counterterrorism at Reichman University, to the Institute's first episode of our official podcast called Unmasking the Threat. Welcome, Miri.
It's wonderful to be here. I'm very excited to be part of the podcast and part of the Institute.
We are too. Miri, just a few days ago, Israel has marked 6 months to the October 7 terror attacks launched by the hybrid terrorist organization Hamas, with 133 hostages still being held captive in Gaza. Never would I have believed in 2024 a sentence like that would come out of my mouth. On a personal note, as a colonel in reserves and a wife and mother to children, how does that make you feel this week?
6 months into it. As a colonel in reserves, I do reserve duty. As a wife, my husband has been in reserve duty for the last 6 months. All 3 of my children are serving right now. The understanding of what October 7th means to all of us is, for me, very personal inside the house. On a more general note, just like you said, I can't believe 6 months in that this is really happening and that it's even worse after 6 months than it was on October 7th, which was so horrific. So as I look at it in that sense, 6 months has brought us to a better place militarily, but not to a better place on any other level.
Yes, for me, the anchored memories from that dark day begin and end with the horrific graphic images I unfortunately exposed myself to on social media. Since October 7th, the whole world has seen both directly and indirectly how Hamas has taken hold of major social media platforms, flooding them with graphic images and videos of their violence against Israel. It seems as if Hamas has realized the opportunity to capture the world's attention and dominate the information space was a realistic goal for them. Can you give us some context on how Hamas has been using social media before October 7th and how their social media and propaganda strategy has changed during and after the October 7th terror attacks?
I would say until the October 7th attack, and this is one of the things that changed, I'll talk about afterwards, is that Hamas very much presented themselves always as resistance. No terror organization calls itself a terror organization. But in addition to the term resistance, it always presented themselves as part of the Palestinians as the victims, which means that everything they do, they're doing as victims. Any action Israel takes means that Israel is attacking the victim. That was clear over the last 10 years. Over the last 20 years, anytime they would attack, immediately afterwards, if there's an Israeli retaliation, Israel is attacking the victims, which is a horrible framing. What they added into it this time has to do with the advance of social media platforms. And in this case, it's the edited versions that you have in social media. Hamas actually put out 2 parallel narratives. The one that terrorized us, Gal, we saw it and we were terrorized, and a second narrative that was slightly edited, not overly edited, mainly on TikTok, but not only, where what they saw at the end was a framing which showed the resistance humiliating the Israelis. The atrocities slightly edited, but shown as humiliation, not as atrocities. And these 2 parallel narratives that came out of the full scale of the atrocities that they did, shown on Facebook Live, killing people on Facebook Live, doing horrific things, on the one hand, within 24 hours kind of disappeared because of the way social platforms work. And on the other hand, the edited versions came with the awe and inspire. And thus we find ourselves 6 months into the war, where that edited version has become the version that people believe. And we find it hard to understand that people can actually believe the awe and inspire and don't understand, not the atrocities, not the terrorism, not the horrific acts that happened.
And more than that, we've seen a lot of narratives in the West blaming Israel for the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and accusing Israel of a genocide. How is Hamas using that same media strategy you spoke about feeding into these narratives?
When we talk about the humanitarian crisis, we're talking about a humanitarian crisis. We're not trying to get away from that. when we look at the aspect of how you view a war, if you're looking at the Palestinians as the victims, as they have been for the last 75 years, victims of both Israel, and we acknowledge that, and certainly of their own leadership, then anything that happens to the Palestinians means that somebody is attacking the victims. And in this case, that framing of looking at it through these edited portions, where what Hamas did is just against the oppressor, and what Israel doing is in creating the humanitarian crisis, is a way of blaming Israel for Hamas's own actions. There is no easy way around it, and in unmasking, in this case, the way that a terror organization uses the platforms itself, it takes a really big leap. I need to tell people, can you imagine, Gal, to go and look at the horrific type of images that I wish that I could take out of your mind? Why would I want somebody to be able to go show them that this actually happened? Meaning it put the onus of proving what really happened on Israel. I'm going to make you see the worst content ever. So in today's world, as we look at that right now, the world itself is looking at the events as if the atrocities did not happen, absolute denial of them. Hamas have denied it from the beginning, and then it becomes an issue of trust. And the additional element of what Hamas did here is that they're trying to legitimize themselves, meaning they're putting onto equal ground the Israeli and the Hamas hybrid terror organization, and I'm supposed to trust them equally. And that is a horrific situation that we have found ourselves in, not only over the last 6 months. This is something that's been around for many years.
Yes, I agree. And looking at this from another perspective, there are very few, if any, social media accounts that haven't been exposed to firsthand accounts documenting sexual abuse, assault, and murder committed by Hamas, as you just mentioned. And yet, despite these firsthand accounts, Hamas has been able to manipulate social media to cast doubt about the accuracy of these reports. So, looking at this, how do you think Hamas is going to respond when more first-hand reports come out over time?
Hamas have already responded to the initial ones, and let's be clear about what they do. They talk to you and to me. That means that they're talking right now to every single one of you listeners who are listening to us right now. They talk in our language. They put out a lovely, I'm being sarcastic, a lovely booklet. It's actually very well done. It's in English, and it's written in all of the terms that are out there to talk to Gal today. What does it say? We, the Hamas, are about freedom and resistance. We are about all of the aspects of the oppressed against the oppressor. And then they went, as they'll put it, allegation after allegation, and they denied. The type of denial that they put there, the only equivalence is Shoah, or as we call it in English, Holocaust denial, meaning they deny it ever happened. In their English booklet that they put out, they very carefully said, we never did any of the atrocities that Israel claims. So then it suddenly becomes about, I'm the judge and the jury, and I have to see, who do I believe more, the oppressed or the oppressor? That's the way that it's framed. And in this sense, yet again, it means that the onus of bringing it to the table and of showing what happened, I have to send now these young women to give their own personal ones, or other people who saw what was happening. They have to come and give testimony, and then it's like it's a court of law. Do I believe them or not? And here it already goes on to a much worse kind of platform, where there has been this horrific change where nobody believes the Israelis. And that one, I not only blame Hamas, but this is something much broader that we're going to need to address in that sense of threats in the future.
And we're going to go into that soon. So we've just talked about Hamas's narratives and how they've developed over time. I'm curious to know if there are any differences in how Hamas tailors its social media strategies from the Western audiences versus the Palestinian population.
Well, first of all, we can say that they use different platforms. TikTok is certainly used extensively. TikTok is great, isn't it? You sit, you edit, you put music, it's fun, it's funky. That's what we call, in that sense, I'm like, look, terrorism is hip. And you go, but that's not terrorism. And I go, actually, it is terrorism. When you're using these edited versions for your own population, just like for any other, they're going to use the same platforms. They don't present themselves and say, "Hi, Gal, I want you to come and be a terrorist. I really want you to come and kill people and murder them and do atrocities to them." No, no, no. The way that they are going to pull you in is by showing that they are resistance and they are strong. It's about a whole different set of capabilities of bringing them into the extremist world and from there into the terrorism world. They use a lot of Telegram inside the Arabic-speaking arena. I'd say that in the West I see that less. Here it's much stronger in the Middle East. But they use edited versions, and in those edited versions, it won't necessarily be specifically about the humiliating of the Israelis. It's going to be about the awe and inspiring of Hamas. Look at me. I am strong. I am active. I am doing something in a very open way. And they show these videos all over in the different types, again, on all these different platforms. They've impacted everybody in the Arabic-speaking world to the degree that, one woman that I teach about here on campus, Queen Raina of Jordan, with her impeccable, perfect English, where she's going to talk to you and me about similar issues, and yet she, Queen Raina of Jordan, denies the atrocities of October 7th. And I go, really? Really, Queen Raina? That's how much of an impact it has.
Do you think that these perceptions among the Palestinians are being used to further radicalize them?
It is part of the extremism in itself in those stages that we talk about somebody like you and me who become radicalized, more extreme, and then suddenly you're in the terror organization and you don't realize that you're in a terror organization because you don't call it that. At the heart of it is an education process which dehumanizes the other side and allows and enables you to do things because you justify it to yourself, you present it in justification, and you take those stages. So it absolutely is radicalizing the youth because what they're saying is that the dehumanizing, oh my God, Gal, where are we? It is being celebrated not just in the Arabic-speaking arena, but worldwide it's being supported. Again, Israel is being shown as the bad guy, as the one that is killing the victims, and Hamas is being shown in that sense as the one who is, as if, in what alternative world, representing them and in some way saving them. And it's hard to understand the gap between these two narratives, but it absolutely brings people into the more extreme world, and from there, it's a short trip to dehumanizing the other side, and then you can do the atrocities and have no problem because you justify it to yourself.
Is it successful in Gaza for them?
In Gaza, we're not as sure. It's very hard nowadays to understand what is happening in both the younger generation and in general. I think that the Gaza Strip right now is a horrible place. It's horrible both because there's a horrible war going on. It was not an easy place before October 7th. It's way worse now. I acknowledge and understand that. The type of attack that Hamas leaders planned, that Hamas terror fighters executed on October 7th came from an education extreme system before October 7th. They trained for it years in advance, and they enacted it on October 7th. So are now the actions now making people there more extreme? I don't want to be sarcastic on radios in that sense, but could you be more extreme than it already came out on October 7th? I'm more worried about the impact both in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, and around the world, where it's showing that, again, it's the idea that in the atrocities that Israel is not human. We are completely dehumanized, that you can do these atrocities and say it's okay because that's what Israel does. And again, that's putting it on the same moral plane. That is one which is very scary when it comes to extremism.
Yes. While we've mostly talked about Hamas, it's worth mentioning that other groups such as Al-Qaeda, ISIS, even far-right extremists in the United States have observed Hamas's actions on October 7th and have shared their own celebratory social media content, seemingly inspired by Hamas. Can you elaborate on the potential risk posed by these terrorist and extremist actors drawing inspiration from Hamas's social media propaganda?
So for all of us who are listening right now and thinking, oh, this is all about Israel, let's take it a step further. In the Hamas charter, in it already, you have horrific anti-Semitic portions of the charter. But we're talking now about Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, and far-right. And what those three have in common, Gal, is horrific anti-Semitism. Islamic State and Al-Qaeda have always had within it, the Jews control the world, the Jews have the power, the Jews have the money. Can I do a few more of these memes? I hate it when I talk about terrorism and I want to present what they're saying. I have to repeat their anti-Semitic memes. And what has happened in these 6 months, and it existed before, but it's exploded, is how the one comes into the other. Meaning it's not just anti-Israel, it's horrifically anti-Semitic. The Islamic State, but especially in that sense, all of their different chapters in and around the Middle East and the world, in English, are saying very clearly, go attack and kill Jews. Go attack, and they give instructions within that, where to go, where you're going to find Jews, how you can attack them, how you can do so. They're not talking about the Jews in the Middle Eastern countries. There are very few Jews in the Middle Eastern countries. That's a different subject for a podcast. They all had to leave, and most of them are in Israel and some in other places in the world. We're talking about go attack the Jews in the United States and in Canada and in Europe and around the world in very specific instructions. So the Islamic State has put out posters in English to inspire people to do so, as have done Al-Qaeda. So when we put all of those in, and the far right, the exact same. Go attack Jews. Jews are the problem of the world. Erase the Jews, you erase the problems of the world. And I want our listeners to go, really? Really, do you believe in what I just said right now? That's what the far right, the Islamic State, and the Al-Qaeda say. It is what Hamas says. It is what Hezbollah says. Listen to them. They're saying that as well.
Do you anticipate that these terrorist and extremist actors will adjust their strategies after witnessing the impact of the Hamas atrocities?
I feel that what they're going to do, because they work okay, let's be very careful. The social media platforms have to remove hate. They have to remove any kind of calls for these different types of violence, so that far right and certainly Islamic State and Al-Qaeda mainly work in what we're going to call dark web. They're not going to do this openly inside the open sources, that the content can be removed. But if you don't say it in such terms, you coin it in slightly less terms. And these are things that the social media platforms can't follow everything. These are things that in the Institute we've tried to research to understand how you can allow these and enable these different things to be happening on the different platforms. So I see them amplifying it. And in this case, it's also calling out the social media platforms who do try to take down horrific content. Gal, they do a lot. It's not enough. They don't take down a bulk of the anti-Semitic content because it can be on the edge of, and we have to be very careful of things like that.
Yes. I would like to shift to to focus now on specific social media platforms, and you actually mentioned one of them, TikTok.
Yeah.
So we've seen that TikTok has been criticized for promoting anti-Israel content, especially during conflicts like the current Hamas-Israel war. What role do you think TikTok plays in this Hamas information campaign? And what impact is this video-only platform having on the younger generation?
So shouldn't we all enjoy it? Isn't this something that we want to enjoy? This is about information and fun. So first of all, the good news is that things are trendy. And right now, this may not be part of the trend, and that's good. Like they're all into it and after it. But I want to be more specific. Most of the social media platforms come from the West. TikTok in this case is coming China, Asia. That's different. This has to do with legal ideas of what is freedom of speech, what can be allowed, and what needs to be removed. And I can have lots of criticism to those social media Western platforms, but they are trying to remove hate content, anti-Semitic content, terrorism content. They do try to remove it. TikTok doesn't have that kind of supervision. It's like the self-regulation that they do or don't do. They have to abide by the laws within the countries that they work. But even on that one there, it's a 90, it's going to be that edited video with the music. And it depends what's put in there, that I'm going to look at it and go, oh my God, that's horrible. And somebody else is going to look and say, you know what? It doesn't actually show the atrocities. And that's why TikTok was used so extensively. That edited aspect of it means that they did things that you can go, that's horrible, but it's not illegal. That's horrible, but it's not terrorism. And here we are right now, and you can see how that kind of platform enables going into the extremist world. And it's very scary, unregulated. Nobody takes down the content. And it's being called out all of the time. And of all places in the United States, they're thinking about banning TikTok because of that, because it doesn't have those regulatory things. I mean, we all bite into social media. Can we be responsible? Can we understand that these platforms enable these capabilities to come out? And most people are not aware of that. It's like, oh, it's my feed. Oh, look. Oh, that must be real. And I'm like, no, it's the edited version. What is real? It's very challenging.
It's truly scary.
It is. It is for this whole generation.
Yes. On another platform in the information war is Telegram. And it's interesting to note that the surge in Hamas's popularity on Telegram since October 7th has gone up. Why do you think Telegram has been so effective for Hamas in spreading their message?
First and foremost, because it has no regulation whatsoever. Meaning you can put whatever content you want into there, more hardcore in that sense, but they don't even need the hardcore because it's a combination of words and images, and it's short. Nothing like a short little message to say, hi, look how I humiliated the Israelis, they deserved it. Hi, I am the oppressed, here's the oppressor, and I've just framed it. Hi, here's a cute little clip on how to run down Israelis or Jews or people who look like Jews. And Telegram in that sense is very extensive because WhatsApp, which is similar to Telegram, but it is because it's under, again, it has to do at the end with the Western and the non-Western, the regulated and the non-regulated. And everything I've just said right now is boring all of our listeners, but it's impacting every single one of you. We don't think about the fact of what's allowed and not allowed. Is everything freedom of speech? And when we're at a stage where immense hatred and the extreme terror voices are being sheltered as if under freedom of speech, I'd have you look in the mirror and say, would you allow that if it was hurting you? So the telegrams in that sense is that you go into these different groups, you get the different feeds, you're reading information, it's quick, it's easy, it's there, and a lot of times it's immediate calls for action. And it's very prevalent throughout the greater Middle Eastern world.
I mean, it became a battlefield on October 7th, a new battlefield for Hamas.
And together with TikTok, that I don't think that we understood the implications of the fact that they could do that edited version, that the combination of the edited version together with the little videos that you're uploading into Telegram, the combination of the two, that's where we are nowadays. That's 6 months into it. You can't just fight back in any way you want. Now, just add into it, I'm sure we'll get into that also, but add into it. When you amplify the voices and you use AI and you use fake news, and here we are in a world where people stand up and say, that was proven as the New York Times as being fake news, which by itself was probably fake news. Not that I'm a supporter of the way the New York Times framed things.
Seems like you can read my mind, because actually my next question is, and we're actually going to have dedicated episodes to these more specific subjects, but just overall, to what extent does technology such as artificial intelligence, bots, and deepfakes play a role in Hamas's social media strategy?
So in this case, we can say, first of all, it does, meaning Hamas already know how to utilize it. And everybody always goes, wow, they're so advanced. And I'm like, listeners, you're listening to a podcast. All of us are advanced. These are elements and capabilities that are already out in the world. So hi, have you all used ChatGPT for something? You go and you look for it. It's part of our world already. It means that you can create fake content. We've all seen that fake content. You know how hard it is to go in and to remove fake content, to identify it and remove it? That's a whole world upon itself, and we all take for granted, oh, that must be real. Add into the fake content the amplifying aspect, meaning you use both, you use different aspects where you amplify the voice. These are already going to be capabilities that we're going to look a step backward into the Iranian world that uses them very successfully. Everybody knows the Russian world or the Chinese world, but the Iranian Islamic regime also know how to use that. And as soon as October 7th starts, the Iranians may not have started it on October 7th, but boy, did they know how to amplify it. And that's to take those voices. And when you get into your feed, 199 pieces that are all saying one thing, and one that says the other, numbers have an impact. And that's going to be both in the artificial intelligence, in the amplification. And it's very good that people are listening to that to understand how much it impacts us. How do you get your information? What is real? What is not? That's part of the world that we live in nowadays. Hamas know how to use it, but also there are other platforms that are helping them amplify it. As I said, the Iranians on the one hand, and you know what? The Chinese and the Russians are not doing us any help either.
So speaking of the Iranians, I'm curious about how much of Hamas's social media strategy is managed directly by them, and how much is it influenced by bigger actors from such as Iran and Qatar?
Certainly influenced by it, and certainly by Iran, and that's interesting that you added in Qatar. I always want to be exact. Iran is not about the 90 million Persian-speaking people in Iran. Iran is about the Islamic regime, within that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, their idea of exporting their version of an Islamic regime to the world. Iran is a highly educated country. It has a very strong, not just military industry, but technology. They're at the forefront, and they know how to use this new platform, not just social media, but the entire cyber world where you use these for your own advantage. Iran is involved in Hamas. I can't say that Iran built their strategy. I'm sure that Iran, again, through the Islamic regime, through the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, teach certain people, help go out. That's one of the advantages of that platform. Gal, we're sitting here right now. We're in Herzliya. We're, inside Israel. On this platform, you can be anywhere. You don't have to go to places. You can teach them online. You can talk to them through WhatsApp, Telegram, whatever, all these different options. So we see that Iranian capability. It takes a state capability, and Hamas have cut the capabilities into different aspects that they use, and then it goes back to Iran and they re-amplify it. Qatar is a bad guy in the arena in general, worthwhile for a different episode, but right now I'm just going to say that Qatar rebranded itself in the run-up to the Mondial. They hosted the Mondial. They did a Mondial. I love the Mondial. I hope that you love the Mondial.
I was there.
See, that's one of those things that you go, can you believe that in 2022, a year and a half ago, you, Gal, actually were in Qatar? Is that not people don't understand the extremities of what we're living in right now. And in that rebranding process, understanding the capabilities of social media, of AI, of talking to the younger generation, of what you show, of the words you use, Qatar know how to do that too. I absolutely think that Hamas learned from that as well.
So adding another layer to that, Al Jazeera has strong ties to Qatar and Hamas. Is there anything that can be done to address the growing influence of Al Jazeera? And to be more exact, given the significance of Qatari influence on the traditional media in the United States, especially that they've taken control of all the universities, how can we ensure that the free press continues to thrive?
So who gets to define what free press is, Gal? Who gets to define what we hear or don't hear? I want to differentiate between the hardcore facts in that sense and between the way we frame them. You and I, Gal, we also choose the facts that we amplify. So in this case, I'm always with Al Jazeera, it's very challenging. Are they telling lies, or are they amplifying certain facts and I'm going to amplify other facts? Al Jazeera is not about Al Jazeera to me. It's about this aspect of presenting the world in a lot of different voices. And I live in a democracy that amplifies endless voices. And Qatar is so not a democracy, and then it has this tool of Al Jazeera to amplify different voices that you can't amplify inside Qatar. I don't have answers for everything. I think that these are challenges we face. If we're listening to podcasts, if we're using TikTok, we use social media, it's where we live. Can we all learn a little bit about what is influencing our day-to-day life? I think that Qatar have used Al Jazeera, the one in Arabic, even more than the one in English, in a way that should be written as, let's show how you can impact, influence, and change people's mind through the use of a platform. That doesn't make it true. That doesn't make it just. That doesn't make it right. And we have to be careful. Specifically in Israel, they're going to outlaw Al Jazeera in Israel. I'm not saying I'm for or against. I always wonder about the platforms of free press because it won't be in Israel, and yet it will be anywhere else. Questions that we have to ask looking into the future of how we counter these voices.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so to end our discussion, let's delve into the counterterrorism front, as we deal with every single day, of strategies for countering Hamas's social media influence. We've seen initial efforts from platforms such as Meta to increase content moderation and remove violent Hamas-related content. What additional steps do you think tech companies should take to effectively combat Hamas's propaganda campaign?
So the social media platforms that we're talking about, if it's Facebook or Instagram or TikTok and the different ones, it first of all, it's looking themselves and saying, is this, we're allowing anything, or we are monitoring? And not all of them monitor, as we say in that sense about TikTok and others. It's much more challenging on what they monitor in the first place. And then they have to remove it. Oh my God, do you realize what I just said? Organizations, no, they're not organizations. These are companies that make money, and I'm telling them that they have to have a moral compass. Who defines the moral compass? Who gets to define in that sense what are the words and the terms and then the visuals that they're going to allow there? I think that every single company who makes money, how do they make money? Through ads. Anybody who advertises there, if they allow hate content, it's not just Hamas, it's hate content, terrorist content in different ways, they need to be aware that that's what they're doing. They're promoting this kind of thing. They're promoting extremism in the world, not free speech. It's easier said than done. Facebook is the one that has the most at stake in the terminology of social media. I think that they have 3 billion users. That means that they need an income. That means that they need ads. That means that we need to have our voices heard. And our voices heard are in those social policies and understanding how much they impact us every single day. It's also legislation in different countries. It's supervising, it's regulation, all for free speech. Free speech does not include hate speech.
And more importantly, to our listeners around the world, and taking that to another layer, is there anything we as individuals can do to counter hateful content that is being published online?
First and foremost, report it. I think that everybody's always like, oh, that's ugly. Okay, I'll scroll down to the next one. There's a little button there. You know, when it's spam and it bugs you, then you hit the button. So if it's hate-filled and you're not sure, and it's something that you think that shouldn't be allowed, then put it up. The social media platforms at the end are human beings. Again, they look at things that you may not understand why it's in there, then ask, why is it in there? Every single person makes a difference. I think that we as individuals have a little responsibility. Don't do it every day. But every single time you ban something because it's spam and it bugs you. So in addition, when you see something that you think the content is hateful, is terror-based, is violent-based, is calls for action of extremism, send it to that social media platform and say, hey, isn't this not supposed to be allowed? That's all it takes. Little button. Let's start using them.
A little action, a big action for our listeners today.
Absolutely.
So, Miri Eisen, thank you very much for joining us today. The director of the International Institute for Counterterrorism at Reichman University, for such an important conversation. And on that note, I would like to dedicate, and the International Institute for Counterterrorism would like to dedicate this episode in memory of the fallen soldiers fighting for the State of Israel and terror victims as we mark 6 months into the Israel-Hamas war. May their memory be a blessing. And thank you very much to our listeners of Unmasking the Threat.
I can't wait for the next one. Thank you, Gal.
Thank you.